Welcome again, everybody, for the recording purposes, to this discussion, Reflections on Documenta 15. I'm sure Gabriela will join us as we proceed. Firstly, I'd just like to introduce our panelists. Okwui Enwezor is a PhD researcher at HDK Valand, University of Gothenburg, and director of Natal Collective. Established in 2012, Natal Collective is an independent production company based in South Africa and active internationally in the research and presentation of creative and cultural Africana contemporary art and politics. Recent projects include editing Climate, Our Right to Breathe, with Hia Y. Chu, Megan Down, Pablo Martinez, and Corina Opria. Climate, Our Right to Breathe is a book in response to vast, mutually exacerbating planetary conditions, the accelerated collapse of the biosphere under climate change, and the increasingly crushing dynamics of toxic politics. Kian Chow, he's coming to us all the way. Oh, I'm sorry, Nkule, where are you coming from? You are in Accra right now?
No, I am in Kumasi right now. So
you're in Kumasi?
Yes. Okay.
Generally based in Gothenburg, between Gothenburg and Newcastle, and currently in Kumasi.
Yes.
Okay. And Kian Chow Kwak, we met some years ago at a conference, I think in Singapore, 2017 it must have been. And Kian Chow visited me in Cape Town when I was at the National Gallery. Oh, so it must have been earlier, it must have been 2015 when you visited in Cape Town. And we've kept in touch over the years. And Kian Chow Kwak was senior curator of the National Museum of Singapore, director of the Singapore Art Museum, and director and senior advisor of the National Gallery Singapore. Kian Chow was associate professor and headed the Arts and Culture Management Program and Kim Wee Center at the Singapore Management University. An independent curator and writer, Kian Chow is a steering committee member of the Global D Center Diversity, Mobility, Culture, right? I'll introduce Gabriela when she joins us. Myself, my name is Riyasan Naidu. I'm a curator, researcher, writer, and from Durban originally, and currently based in Paris. So I'm coming to you live from Paris. Wet and rainy and cold. And yeah, I've curated and I've also been a director of the National Gallery. And I also directed a project called the South Africa Mali project, Timbuktu Manuscripts. So I spent a lot of time in Timbuktu, Mali in the past. Gabriela has just joined us. Thank you, Gabriela. We thought,
Good morning from Lisbon. I'm sorry, I've been a little bit delayed. I apologize. I'm installing an exhibition and we just had a delivery of a very big piece and I had to be there. Sorry.
No, absolutely. So Gabriela is Argentinian-born curator based in London and installing an exhibition in Lisbon.
Complicated.
Gabriela gained a curating contemporary art master's degree from the Royal College of Art, and since 1997 she has curated a large number of exhibitions and has lectured in over 20 countries. She specialized in Latin American art as curator of the Latin American art collection at Essex University, was curator of public programs at Tate Modern, and she curated La Otra Biennale in Bogota, Colombia in 2013, and the second Biennale of Thessaloniki in Greece in 2009, and acted as jury member for the Prince Class Awards and Video Brazil Festival. She created Transatlantic Connections, a program of exchanges for African and Latin American artists from 2011 to 2016. And between 2017 and 2020, she worked as artistic director of the Tuhi contemporary art in Auckland, New Zealand. And in 2022 became director of the showroom in London. So I want to just briefly talk about visiting Documenta, and then I'll open it up to the panelists to share their views. And then we'll have a general discussion, and the last 15 minutes will open up for some questions from the audience. If I can share my screen, Dineo. Oh, I forgot to introduce you to Dineo from VIAD, who is administering the Zoom talk today and controlling everything behind the scenes.
You're welcome to share now, Liaison.
Okay, thank you. Right, just hang on a second. So I just thought for many of us who did not visit Documenta, to get an idea of you know, what it looked like, what the exhibition looked like. Documenta has received a lot of media attention, very mixed reviews. It was curated by ruangrupa, an Indonesian art collective, and they were the first Asian artistic director and first collective of Documenta. That happens only once every 5 years. Ruangrupa was formed in 2000 in Jakarta by a group of 7 artists and provides a platform in Indonesia for exhibitions, research, publishing, workshops, and events, often working across the disciplines of art, social science, politics, and technology. I think many people came to Documenta expecting the usual kind of Documenta, but what we saw, especially at the main venue, Friedrichshain building, was a very different kind of exhibitions, I think the likes of which Documenta has not seen before. So there were lots of questions in the media as well about where is the art, and we'll come to why those questions were asked. But this image that you have on your screen greeted many of the visitors at the entrance to the main building. And as you can see, this is the kind of mind map that ruangrupa had worked on. You know, it was a kind of work in progress, but looking at some of the major issues that they were working with, that they were thinking through, and this greeted visitors at the entrance. So you can see me making friends, collectives, sharing, all very noble kind of values. I found this quite interesting, that generally you have it presented very slick kind of graphics and vinyl. All of the funders were handwritten on the board, and that I've almost never seen before. So it kind of made it very personal in a way. The concept of this year's Documenta 15 was lumbung, and this refers to a communal rice barn where the surplus harvest is stored for the benefit of the community. So ruangrupa took the opportunity to share the stage with 14 other collectives from the south, from Indonesia to Haiti, from Mali to India. These collectives in turn invited friends. This is the term ruangrupa prefers, and these friends also participated in the exhibition. So this is how the network kind of worked. It was kind of through the collectives and through association of those collectives. So this global sharing of solidarity, of equality, of art activism is not totally unfamiliar to many of us in the global South. But at Documenta, this saw a clash with you know, the conventional types of exhibitions, which are very market-oriented and very prevalent in the Western-centered art world. So Documenta 15 by ruangrupa challenged the conventional definition of the artwork, as well as market-driven systems and practices. And the absence of artists linked to prestigious galleries was also notable. So I've put up just a few images together to give us an idea of some of the artworks that were on display. These were by artist Richard Bell from Australia, acrylic on canvas. So a lot of the concerns were really about, well, in this case, about land, which was one of the main issues. Małgorzata from Poland, who's also exhibiting at the Venice Biennale under the Polish Pavilion, had these textiles on show, 5 of them. And I must say that the Polish Pavilion in Venice is also one of the outstanding pavilions at the Venice Biennale this year. And then these are just other images from the exhibition at the main venue, speaking of gypsies in Europe, the gypsy community, highlighting the cause of the gypsies, a woman in resistance, a poster, 8 March 1990, and also going back to as far back as the Harlem Renaissance in the USA, so the 1920s, and even further. So highlighting, you know, many of the marginalized, repressed histories over the last century. So these were, many of these were books and exhibition catalogs, photographs, so archives and archival collections that were displayed in the main building. This is a group picture of the Baroda School of Art in Gujarat in India that was quite notable in the 1970s and 1980s. And this is the photo I took from the Keleketla Media Arts Project. Another image. And then in the next building, Documenta Hall, there was a huge panel on Bollywood. So you can see what this looked like, looking at the history of Bollywood. At the Hubner Ariel venue, one of the outstanding exhibitions was the Sogolan company from Mali, 200 masks and puppets. This was for me one of the most outstanding installations on show. And of course, I got the opportunity to look at Abdoulaye Konaté's winning piece from Dakar 1996, Hommage aux Chasseurs du Monde, in textile works. It's the first time I've seen that work. And in the same venue, we had this important piece, Tokyo Reels by Subversive Films, 20 film reels on the Palestinian struggle collected by the Japanese Palestinian Solidarity Group in the 1970s and 80s. And in 2019, Subversive Films were entrusted with the material and to work with the footage. At another venue, Hallenbad Oost was hosted an exhibition by Taring Padi from Indonesia also. And these are some general shots from the venue and the exhibition inside the venue. You can get an idea of their work. They often work with these cardboard cutouts, as you saw in the first image, but also a lot with graphics with lino and woodcut. And working very much in the public space. And just in terms of the images that I have, lastly, at the St. Kunigundis Church was an exhibition curated by the Ghetto Biennale from Haiti. And these are just some installation shots by Edouard Duval-Curry, who is formerly from Port-au-Prince, but is based in Miami, USA. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of, what Documenta was about. I mean, unfortunately, it's not comprehensive, but these are some snapshots from the photos that I have on my phone, and gives you an idea of, some of the works that were on display in the different venues. Without further ado, I would like to invite Kian Chow to perhaps share his thoughts on your visit to Documenta. Kian Chow.
Thank you. Thank you, Rasul. Hello, Johannesburg, and hello, everybody. I realize that you actually come from everywhere, and a great privilege to be in conversation with the fellow panelists as well as the audience who are participating. Thank you. Now, I also like to thank VIAD for organizing this, and also to thank Sasa Art Projects in Cambodia, where I'm actually right now in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and they have facilitated my presentation here. Now I'm in Phnom Penh. I'm normally based in Singapore, but I'm in Cambodia actually to attend a workshop, which is entitled Scenarios for Collectivizing Care, and is facilitated by Kunci Study Forum and Collective of Jakarta, Indonesia. So you can think of this as an extension of lumbung, that keyword, popularized by Documenta 15, as Riasan has just explained. I'm also visiting several other collectives here in Cambodia, and all this, you might say, is a part of the lumbung's sphere, right? Before, after Documenta 15. Now, Documenta 15 and Lumbung 1 are both destinations referring to Documenta event in Kassel, which of course closed in late September. Now, I visited Documenta during the opening week. That was in June, and I was, I must say, I was a little bit agitated because I went there, having in mind that I'll be visiting a biennale type event, meaning that I will be visiting exhibition and there will be finished works to look at. In the documenta handbook, there is this line that says the viewer is obsolete. But when my 2-day pass also became obsolete, I had to consider whether to pay another 45 euros to do another 2 days. And I had a total of 32 venues to cover. It was an impossible task, let alone the high cost of the airfare and accommodation to get and to be in Kassel. So I felt that there were actually 2 classes, right, in Kassel at that point. Those who were invited and have everything paid for, and those who actually went there and without funding and to try to see a biennale type event. Now, only to find that we were supposed to be looking at processes, works in progress, and it was all about conversations and engagement, and how to do that all in 2 days. So I volunteered to do a very short stint as an unofficial obok, meaning friend, or a docent of sorts, right, in museum terms. These were normally taken up by Kassel's residents, and I ended up hosting actually a Kassel resident instead. And this was done at the Vessels Trust venue. So it was a very unusual experience for me because, for a biennale, I visited probably dozens of them, but I never had this obok encounter before. And that provided me with a very fresh perspective, experience of a biennale type event. And in our discussion, I was also happy that we did not get into the discussion of socially engaged art, because I didn't also want to go, down the theoretical path in this discussion, but to want to experience documenta as it was. As it turned out, this encounter turned out to be a cue for me to get into the main point of Documenta 15. I also spoke with many artists who were in Kassel, and now being in Phnom Penh, I am also speaking to some of the artists who participated in Kassel. So I'm now like experiencing the lumbung in a global south home ground, if you like, in order to close the loop of my comprehension of Documenta 15 and lumbung 1. Now, let me explain this one further. Speaking with artists who participated in Documenta 15 here in Phnom Penh, I realized that challenges, constraints, and resourcefulness, right, in running collectives that need to be very flexible, moving in and out of parallel art circles, locally and globally, aesthetically, discursively, and organically. And this is when we think of Documenta having that exhibition frame, right, of exhibition, art, event, every one of those words must take on a new kind of flexibility when you are looking at this from a global south home ground. So when we say that in lumbung, art and everyday life merge, in a seamless way, as it is often articulated, I believe what this notion really emphasizes is that there is no need to forge a clear difference in definition in any hardened way to talk about the distinction between art and life. Or rather, this is not so important, at this point from the perspective of the collectives. So this is quite different, right? The scenario here is quite different, and in many ways, more dynamic, a more dynamic terrain than that of the mega art exhibitions exhibitionary framework. The idea of a display type exhibition emerged, of course, from the beginnings of the idea of public art museum or public museums, which was set up as an extension, right, of private princely collections that were shared with the general public for a viewing experience, right? The underlining point here is a viewing experience. So apart from stating that the viewer was obsolete obsolete. The ruangrupa in the documenta handbook stated this. When we started to plan for the documenta, we realized that making a showcase of collective practices already done by many in many art centers would be a trap. This is what ruangrupa said, right? This is all done. So I read in this line that greatest compatibility of documenta and lumbung, and documenta with a budget of 42.2 million euros, and documenta in appointing ruangrupa must have been constrained also from the perspective of the documenta organization to recuperate, to have to have some revenue from ticket sales and from merchandise. So this is totally understandable, but the experience of paid visitors would result in some frustration, as I initially encountered. And underpinning it all is the incompatibility of a mega art exhibitionary platform, compromised presentations by the collective, because they told me that they try to adhere to a kind of exhibition model when it is done in documenta, but back in the global south is a lot more organic. You do not put up a show just for the walk-in visitors, but you are always engaging the community and even a person at a time. So it's a very different approach to exhibition. And the controversy of the anti-Semitic imagery, right, that was encountered in documenta really further complicated the pack. So in a co-authored review on documenta 15, Shirley, Nordin, and I have noted that much is dependent on what context of the event type and its own genealogy, nature of participation, discursive and cultural context of the artwork, and even of the same work in different locality. So to be sure, the images concerned in Tarin Padi's People's Justice, which was actually created 20 years ago, are anti-Semitic, but we also have noted that the work, a critique of Suharto's military dictatorship back in Indonesia and the genocide in 1965 in Indonesia, must have been read in the context of Indonesian history. Historian Michael Rothbard noted that the work should be taken as a critique of militarism. The Star of David is likely less a symbol of Jewish identity than of Israel's aiding of the Suharto's regime, as cited here in Min Nguyen's article. So context, of course, cuts in many ways. Now, looking at documenta's own legacy and trajectory of being in the forefront of the cutting edge in contemporary art, how the documenta series arrived at Lumbung in 2002 is itself, to me, a kind of logical evolvement from documenta 10, Catherine David, the first female artistic director of documenta, who presented documenta that was more comprehensively global, and then to Okwui Enwezor, the first non-European artistic director in his post-colonial constellation, which is a sphere of discursive domains and artistic circuits, as well as expanded curatorial and research collaboration. Now, to documenta 15 in ruangrupa, the first Asian collective overseeing of documenta 15. Now, this to me is a logical trajectory far as the evolvement of documenta is concerned. However, in 2002, documenta is faced by the very incompatibility between its own exhibitionary frame or platform and Lumbung. So the situation led to many readings of Documenta 15 as incongruous of global North and global South artistic cultures. Now, there is certainly quite a lot of truth in this. And however, as a review by Miu in eFlux, which just came out last week, I believe, has underpinned, we should also do a more nuanced consideration of this binary. My take here is that Phnom Penh, where I am, also confirms, my experience here, that this broader landscape and how the collectives are sophisticated in negotiating the ecosystem from the lumbung to the art market, also foregrounding the communal and the pedagogical, and all being part of the everyday life of collectives in the global South. Now, in Johannesburg, I read that there was this Lumbung Josi event, and just as lumbung was also looked at in a recent conference organized by Monash University of Australia, during which ruangrupa presented after Lumbung 1, and that Ade Dhamma 1 of ruangrupa reflected that the scale, right, the scale of was an issue. We could now be looking at say collectives of dots and dashed lines that would link up this lumbung global sphere as opposed to a singular mega art event. Now, during the Let There Be Lumbung Forum held in Kassel near the close of the Documenta 15, Nuraini Julius Tuti, reminded that, well, lumbung referred to a communal rice bun, but rice was not necessarily the staple in many areas, at least in some areas in Indonesia. So lumbung was also the food sustainability policy of Jakarta that could have caused actually the disruption of agricultural diversity in some of the communities in Indonesia. Hence, even the very term lumbung should also be subjected to a continual critical assessment. And this criticality could itself be the spirit of lumbung as foregrounded by Documenta 15. I have a little bit more, but we'll end here and we'll go for discussions, as more topics come out in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kian Chow. These are some of the images that you sent earlier that we're just looking at on the screen, which Dineo has put together. These are random photos also from Documenta. You can see that's the lumbung film, subversive film. So that's what's important there at the bottom left of your screen. And what can we potentially do with collective resources? That's the poster. This is the image that I showed earlier, but you can see more of the context and how the scale of it actually. This kind of working diagram. Black Lives Matter, Queer Lives Matter. This is in the, we saw some of these of the Bollywood mural. This is from the Taring Padi venue. So you can see an installation view there. And this is outside Taring Padi venue. So Taring Padi actually used all the space given to them, including the lawns, so that when you were driving past this venue, you really knew that there was something happening there. It really attracted attention from the street and from drivers and people on the bus. I found this very effective and it was quite striking. This is the same venue that showed the Sogolon company we looked at earlier. Yeah, thank you, Dineo. On that note, I would go straight into, thank you, Kian Chow, for that presentation. And I would like to invite Mpule Mabaso to give us her thoughts on visiting Documenta.
Great. Thanks, Ryson. Thank you, Kian Chow and Gabriella, for being part of the conversation. So, I mean, I didn't prepare any slides or images, but just some thoughts on my experience at the quinquennial. And so the things that I'd like to touch on were around collectivity as political stance, friendship, and the economies of circulation as offered by Lumbung 1. And also this is drawing, my reflections of it, drawing from my experience of working collaboratively and having edited an issue on curating on collaboration in 2016. In that issue, I was looking at collaboration as management practice and collectivity as ideation. So yeah, some series of disclaimers. I did not follow the online discussions in the German-centric moral panic news that accompanied some parts of the exhibition, but I was in Kassel over 3 days on the closing week in September, so I was able to at least attend some of the talk that were happening around the lumbung, and it was also great because at the time around the closing, a lot more colleagues were back in the city trying to re-see the exhibition or see it for the first time before it closed. So while I did not experience all the venues, as Ken Chan said, it's an impossible task. It was really huge and spread out all over the city. My experience of looking through was still a very charmed experience because I was accompanied by a member of the finding committee of the quinquennial, and I had some moments of intimate contact with the members of ruangrupa who were visible and accessible at the rural house and also the house that they were living, and they were all around, very generous and welcoming. So yeah. My reflection then on the lumbung is that it offers a temporary stabilization that makes particular moments of thinking and ideation appear. One encounters the after effects of some of the discussions that had been ongoing before one entered into the exhibition space. And the ideas are not crystallized into objects for consumption, but are in themselves further prompts into seeing methods and interactions between people, spaces, and ideas. So even though the terms of reference like lumbung, nongkrong are drawn from this kind of rural agricultural sphere of organizing in Indonesia, they also evoke a geographically situated imaginary of communing that is in opposition to the typical neoliberal division between resources, producers, and consumers, or also differences between differentiating fields of activity. The lumbung in itself is another framework that expands the critical regimes of the current contemporary art context that has been under the sway of speculative art market, so that the methods employed within structuring Documenta 15 are connectable to other, for me at least, other artistic impulses around collectivity and collaborative practices that have been, an ongoing processes. Collectivity as a political stance in this case, so including the way that the artists are engaged with political engagement and activistic endeavors, has for a long time been moving us away from the idea of artists as individual genius, creating autonomous objects, and has been moving us closer towards practices that often engage and build on collective authorship to situate local concerns. May that be the tackling of questions on identity, history, or globalization, and using communing to find new ways to assert other modalities into cultural spaces and knowledge-making institutions. Where the mega exhibition has been the space of accentuating the authorial position of the individual, sort of like the singular curator, the singular artist in previous context. In the Documenta 15, what we saw were networked collectives who, through the advances of communication technologies and globalization, are producing projects and ideas that surpass geographical borders and consist of collaborative phases, both at virtual levels and speak to the wide circulation and exploration and alternative ways of artistic knowledge production. So it's both about what has been facilitated by the degrees of technological advancements that connect people, and also the wider ways in which people move in different contexts through artistic production. The invocation of friendship. So another interesting invocation is the figure of the friend. We all have more or less an understanding of who or what a friend is. And perhaps in this case of the documenta, the friend is both a relational position and a constellation of practices of worlding. And friendship as an experience which lies somewhere outside neoliberal institutional approval because its forms cannot be dictated. Here, friendships are interpersonal networks anchored in nurturing long-term exchange that are based on systems of social reciprocity and mutual benefit through the facilitation of opportunities and social contacts, and who one knows also become a currency that is exchanged. So the provocation then of make friends, not art, implies that friendship is an activity with deference for the long term, and speaks to the interdependencies hinged on social networks and the potential that this connectedness then can produce to respond to the uneven landscapes of distribution of resources in different contexts. What was for me seen during the exhibition then modeled the possible terms of ethical considerations when working together, how responsibility is developed as an ongoing engagement that extends the platform of the lumbung past the moment of the mega exhibition. And this has also been their stated claim that all of the experimentation and ideas that have been generated during the lumbung have extend beyond the 100 days of the temporary stabilization that we see in Kassel. Another point was around, the economies that are invoked. So ruangrupa's curation also became, a massive experiment in decision making, and this has also been explicated in different writings and their talks and explanation, which was around forming democratic assemblies of artists that were part of the deciding how the exhibits would be organized, how funds would be allocated, and the mobilizing of sort of non-capitalist infrastructures of social solidarity. So while this was not always physically evident in the spaces, I think what was felt clear to me, at least, was that nothing appeared contrived simply for inclusion into the exhibition. So the attempt to do things differently took various guises and drew from recognizable ideas. So Lumbung Gallery brings to mind the artist-run gallery space, the kiosk brings to mind the artist co-op, etc. And all of these are within the larger collectivizing impulse. Other are examples of united labor taking form inside the structure. So there's like multiple moments of different variations of what collaborating and collectivizing look like. And then I think the taking from, because of course some of these ideas are recognizable. So then what then was interesting is actually the scale of the structures that are developed, because while they follow recognizable models, we can trace it back to some degree, but then the scale of the documenta is partly going to be part of the enduring legacy of the exhibition, sort of like what happens to these models that were produced, and if these are somehow continued and inspire other artistic communities to further develop and institutionalize their own prototypes of commons-oriented political economy of art making processes. And just one last thing that I wanted to share was in the talks of the Let There Be Lumbung series talks, Charles Escher gave a provocative talk titled The First Exhibition of the 21st Century. And him calling the documenta the first exhibition of the 21st century, he meant this as a catchphrase. He said, to consider the radiating impact of Lumbung 1 on the future political horizons of artistic organizing and collectivizing. And this brought to my mind, listening to him, the writing of Okwui Enwezor when he said, historically, collectives tend to emerge during periods of crisis and in moments of social upheaval and political uncertainty within society. Such crises often force appraisals of conditions of production, reevaluation of the nature of the artistic work, and reconfiguration of the position of the artist in relation to economic, social, and political institutions. So this historical reading of the propositions of Lumbung, which I would want to, still do in the slower place, I'm hoping will reveal the extent of the break that the processes of this exhibition has produced in relation to past instances of communing, sort of like really how different has it been to all the other moments when we have seen collectivity emerge at different moments, and then how the scale of documenta itself informs our relationship to past impulses and then the future trajectory that it throws us into. So this was basically also in the context of Enwezor, because he, in his text that I was referring to above, he draws the longer term historical trajectory of collectivity back to the Paris Commune of the 1800s. And I think that, there's many moments of collectivity, and somehow it remains as having a kind of an emancipatory appeal. So post-pandemic, it would be interesting to understand what this gesture means and where it takes us.
Thank you, Nkule. We'll come back to many of those points. We've got some time a little bit later, but important points that you brought up about collective collaboration, about it being a political stance, the individual genius versus the collective. I think this is a very important one. Friendships, because I was also attended one or two of the talks on the closing weekend, and I used the word network and I was corrected, and ruangrupa prefers the term friends instead of network. And of course the economies, artists run spaces, and I think that's also come to the fore in this exhibition. But we'll return to that shortly. I want to give the mic over to Gabriela Salgado, who's been waiting patiently. Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rezon, for the invitation, and to my colleagues. Nkule, thank you so much, and Kiancho for your perspectives. I actually was very interested in listening first to Kiancho talk from Phnom Penh, because this is a place I was in that particular room when I visited Sasa a few years ago, when I was doing a residency and project at Sanat in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And we visited and launched our film program in that very building you are in now. And this spirit of collectivity that I witness in there, the community around that space. And I just want to say that for me, I really enjoyed visiting Documenta this time. I was in two minds about attending because of all the negative commentary. The press didn't bother me that much. We are used to media coverage that is not necessarily analytical or aligned with our views as professionals in the arts, but there was a moment of a hesitancy, as Nkule was saying, and you also were saying, Pietro, about, you know, how will you experience an exhibition that was so organically presented, that was more intangible than the usual model of exhibition, which is in itself a very exciting opportunity. So I went and I spent some days in Kassel, which is a very complicated, it's a city with a complicated history. And hence my analysis would be more about the epistemological tensions that this document has presented. I'm very interested in the way that Germany as a country, I'm not talking about every citizen of Germany or political parties, I'm talking about as a construct, Germany within Europe, within the West, reacts against a new form of making a project as emblematic as Documenta be and exist within a context, historical context, that was about recovering the spirit of the German nation after it had been crushed during the war, recovering the pride of being German in 1945, and this initiative by artists who were very forward-thinking of creating a new spirit for Documenta that was full of good intentions, and of Documenta, creating Documenta as a project that would highlight the spirit of hope for the future. Now, we're talking about the 1940s, and we are now at a time of turmoil, post-pandemic, global pandemic, but also a time of ecocide and epistemicide as constructs in the intellectual world, in the academic world, and in the art world by adoption, where these models of operation that created those utopian projects 50, 60, 70 years ago are no longer valid. So this is where I am interested in Documenta. This is the point from where I start enjoying the formulations. Ruangrupa it was known to me. I knew the members from meeting in different places in Europe. I never been to Indonesia, but I knew about their practice. I saw that their program will certainly challenge the format of the art exhibition beforehand. I knew other collectives in Asia talking about how challenging it would be for them to try to fit in these collectivity, these principles of organic making, of leaving everything very open, not closing down, not trying to curtail the capacity of the event, the conversation, the publication, and the art installation, and making it much more fluid and less defined as it is by markets and by the ways of institutions that we have in the global South inherited from the West. So this is another turn of the wheel for me, and that is why I found it very foundational and didn't look at the details of how it operated. I heard collectives participating saying how difficult it was. I had positive feedback, but at the same time, how challenging it was to, very simply put, have Zoom meetings with 200 members of different collectives around the world at the same time and trying to make decisions. And, you know, all that is operational, but the core of the matter for me, what I left with and what gives me hope is that there is a paradigm change that comes out of this experience. It doesn't mean that every Documenta in the future will be, or every biennale will be, about modes of operation that are focusing on collectivity and circular economies and restoring knowledge systems. I hope it will be, but it won't be as easy as that. What we are seeing is a voice from the Global South, and Global South also is a complex construct as a node that contains so many Souths. How do we come to an agreement? It's like that metaphor of the rice lumbung. We don't necessarily find rice meaningful in South American communities, although rice is part of the staple diet, is a staple of the diet, but it's not necessarily seen as a fundamental concept, and also in some African and Caribbean and other Asian and Polynesian societies. But what it means as a symbol, that idea that everybody brings their part into a pot that will then be shared, is something that is very integral to the ways that our communities and our countries and our regions have known for millennia before colonization. So there is a very interesting opportunity here to see the possibility of understanding struggles that not necessarily have come to the fore before. When you mentioned, Chris, at the beginning of your presentation, the work of Richard Bell, I lived in the Pacific for 3 years when I was working in New Zealand. It's a Maori country where indigenous epistemologies are a very large part of what's happening in culture and in the art world. And I happened to be in the Australian Biennale done by Brooke Andrew, that was about precisely working with indigenous epistemologies, which was the first time in Australia. That was also, a project that completely changed the game in that part of the world. And seeing the embassy of Richard Bell, I mean, the paintings are extraordinary. I really enjoy them. And they speak about the same. But seeing the tent outside the Fredericianum, which is the heart of Documenta, the heart of Documenta's power. And he planted his tent, which had been touring the world for many years, from the Venice Biennale to many other locations, showing that Aboriginal people exist. First and foremost in Australia, until I saw that Biennale by Brooke Andrew. I'd never seen so many Aboriginal artists and audiences coming together, because simply they are invisible on the coast of Australia. In coastal cities, you don't see them, which is outrageous. But then these projects, which are not changing the status quo in terms of how that will be managed in the future, at least is advancing a presence and privileging a knowledge system. Not only a knowledge system, but the capacity for people to have their own voice in their own land. That was significant, as Documenta is significant. And that is why Richard Bell's embassy, for me, was fundamental in the inclusion in Documenta. In relation to other things you mentioned, I was looking at the images you shared of the Bollywood mural. That space was incredibly active. There was a skateboard space for people to activate all the time. And there was a printing press in the middle of that room. And there was a room for films made in Africa with very low budgets behind a printing press. That was extraordinary. I mean, the combination of knowledge systems, the combination of initiatives with low budget, more budget, with more visual output and less visual output, all of that is interesting in itself, because it's challenging the parameters of the market and the way that the market dictates even public institution programs. So for that only, I thought it was an amazing experience. Then the idea of how we connect across the South is interesting to me, because I've been trying to do that with my work, starting from my own region, from Latin America, living in Europe, and trying to bring this idea of Latin America together because we in our continents are quite isolated and are more aware of our national thinking construct rather than the regional and the larger. So I saw that in Africa as well, and that's why my colleague, the visionary B.C. Silva, created ASICO in order to connect the dots in the continent by providing a very experimental pedagogical platform for like an independent informal university kind of situation where people from the continent will be sitting in the same room with neighboring countries, artists from neighboring countries which were not actually known to them. So this idea of a roving university in the continent that attempted to put all of those different ways of making art and thinking about art together. For me, that opportunity arose when I was in Britain in charge of a collection of Latin American art, and I realized that I knew my little corner of South America, but I didn't know the rest of Latin America that well. So that gave me the opportunity to start understanding the region. And that is why that was the beginning of this, trying to understand what happens across. So I would like to go back to the Bandung Conference, which is also a very important historical moment in 1955 in Indonesia, when the global south of that time, or the non-aligned countries met in order to discuss solidarity networks and the possibility of creating a different circulation. I think that documenta is picking up from other historical precedents of that globalized idea of the South, which not necessarily means everybody understands what the others are doing, but it is a modus operandi that is common. So when we get together, we eat, we share food. I love the possibility of having this, Brito Arts Trust project is incredible. Outside with the vegetable garden, people eating outside, the generosity of providing food to the visitors and to be able to see what the gardens, they were growing the food, and to have conversations with people. This is what documenta was at its best. Then in terms of exhibitions, they were remarkable exhibitions, like Medio Look was extraordinary exhibition because of the sound capacity to convey the idea of land, the idea of dispossession, many ideas that were actually brought together by this incredible experience of oral experience, this idea of sound communicating better than words. So in a way, even though you can't like any project you see in Venice or Documenta or any other mega project, I felt that everything for me was made valuable by connecting dots, but also allowing a generosity of spirit and experience rather than just attempting to collect a number of artists to work with, as curators do when we go to these events. It's like, oh, I like this. I'd love to work with this artist. Like, all that was there, but at the same time, it was much more a richer and a more relaxed experience, which I enjoyed personally. And I found that Ruru House was an incredible space that allowed rest and repose after walking around the city, chasing venues, trying to see as much as possible in a condensed time. And Ruru House always was this gravitational center where people tended to meet. And it was incredible. I met so many people I didn't expect to see in Ruru House. So it worked at many levels for me. And again, going back to the idea coming from the colonial theories, I could talk about Enrique Dussel or Sousa Santos, this idea of epistemicide and ecocide becoming a very important theoretical and political notions at a time when the West is confronting its own role in those processes and coming to us, as I'm generalizing, but coming to indigenous cultures, to non-Western cultures, to the south of the world, to seek solutions. I think there is something extremely cynical about what I'm saying. Of course, I recognize that, but I have an impression that, yes, now that everything is collapsing, according to the Western paradigm of extraction and no giving back, which is the opposite of documenta represented. We are now confronted with this exploitation of a new kind. So was that something that motivated an engagement of a South Asian collective to documenta? That is up in the air for discussion. I am not sure. I don't think that was the idea. The idea was to probably include other, I want to believe, other ways of making an exhibition. But then we need to be very vigilant again about how extractionism can work and how, in which capacity we can provide an equality of platform, an equality of participation in a new way of making exhibitions and beyond exhibitions. Sorry, I don't want to extend too long.
Thank you, Gabriela. Thanks. And I think, I mean, some important points that you raised. One of the important things I think that this documenta did was to challenge the status quo and the hierarchy and power relations. I think this was one of the key objectives, and I think was successful in that. But also, I think another point that you made about the global South is that it's not homogeneous. You know, it's a blanket term that's, you know, it's like saying non-European or non-white. It's like everything that's not, you know, European or not white, that, you know, is described by this term. So, which is very, very, you know, complex and with different contexts and experiences, each one. But also, as you were speaking, I was also thinking about this notion of the decolonial and how Europeans are bringing this notion of the decolonial to the global South also, you know, which is a kind of trend these days where people want to teach global South in, or want, you know, academics from the North want to teach global South, want to teach in the global South on decolonization. Some thoughts from my side is, you know, I mean, I think what is also at play here is a Marxist reading of art. I haven't seen this written too much about, but, you know, coming from a colonial context into a post-colonial context, many countries in the global South were influenced by Marxist readings. And this also influenced the art. And I'm thinking also about collectives in South Africa, like the, you know, CAP, the Community Arts Project in Cape Town, Funda, Fuba. So there were collectives during apartheid, you know, people coming together, sharing resources. So these are familiar terms, these are familiar ways of organizing. You know, when you are kind of invisible in the art world. And for me, I have mixed feelings about documenta, actually, because I didn't know what to expect. I read a little bit, but many things felt very familiar to me. You know, in the main building, walking around, looking at the archives, looking at things I would never expect to see in documenta. And and often when you visit these huge art festivals, you're an outsider. But here at documenta, I felt at home. And when you look at what they were trying to do, at first I was also looking for the art. So I was also a little bit disappointed about, you know, where is the art? But when you understand what they were trying to do, also in terms of process, how process became important and how this was transparent so that it wasn't, you know, it was there to be seen by everyone. This, the process of working, of workshopping, of discussion, of consultation, I think this was also important. Yeah, so I think what, they try to make that visible so that, nothing is kind of hidden. I mean, to what degree this was achieved, I cannot say here, but I can definitely see that some of the intentions, behind what ruangrupa was trying to do. But I think something that is very important is that we can trace a lot of this back to kind of Marxist readings on art around the world, especially in many countries in the global south. And of course, when we're talking about the market as well, this Marxist reading of challenging the market, of not producing art solely for the purpose of sales and for commercial reasons, but for producing art, for other kinds of reasons. But for now, I want to just open up the discussion to our panelists first. If you want to have any further points, Kian Chow, perhaps we'll revert to you. Do you want to elaborate on some points that you mentioned or have new thoughts?
The fellow panelists have discussed a lot, and it's a very rich discussion. And both pointed to the documenta 15 as a gesture or as a symbol that suggests maybe a break from the other mega art events. We did look at, parallels, right, with other elements of parallels with other art events and so on. But maybe I could ask whether, in a broader analysis, whether it does suggest a break, and what does it mean really in the case of having a collective presentation of collectives, but in the center, right? In the center of cutting edge art avant-garde in Kassel, which has its long history of being in the forefront.
I can say that for me, it doesn't present a break, but rather a continuity on practices that have been around, moving from the single author perspective of like single producers, individuals and so on, and being part of the history of gestures around collectivity and collectivizing, which have, I pointed out, has been a longer praxis that is always there and has been, in a sense, an undercurrent. That's why somehow it is interesting that for me, that the documenta is a moment of stabilization of processes that are ongoing, which have been ongoing for longer time periods in the past and shall probably continue into the future in parallel to other developments of what is more visible in the art market and circulation and this kind of things, but not that it is. So I would want it to be read and understood as how scale affects the visibility, and if that scale itself of the moment, to what extent does it catalyze how collectivity and collaboration are perceived within knowledge production in the arts and producing sort of artistic practices. But also, like you said, Ryasan, that a lot of the things or experiences or installations and so on felt familiar because there are gestures that have come across in different moments all the time that you encounter, but it could be in the general format of an exhibition, of a large format exhibition, but you would have 2 or 3 archives present doing something within the larger framework so that they're not completely outside of a system, but there is some co-option and parallel development along the line. But what we are seeing was just a very specific moment where it was central around collectivism and this kind of networked presences. And then again, the big visibility was also around how it all comes together, and sort of like collectives within collectives, networks within networks, and making that more visible. So it's like you've got a compound structure of different instituting moments of what have been developed within different modes of communing and working together. So there's something going on about a mega visibility of all these little gestures and processes that have been developed over time, happening together all at the same time, and the complexity of understanding and arriving at all of them within 100 days. And it's also about consumability, which is kind of an impossibility. So it's really a series of prompts in the end. So
before I go to you, Gabriela, because I know you want to say something, but I think this is also a difference between, for example, communities in the global south and the north, for example, where community is important. And I think I'm taking it out of the art context now when I'm just talking about life in general, where, I think I've been living in Paris for the last almost 5 years. And, people lead very kind of isolated lives. Of course, you have friends, etc., that you meet from time to time, but very different to my experience of living in South Africa, where there's much more community, and this is a difference I think I find also in art, where, as you said about the individual genius versus the collective, so I think we see a reflection of society in art. And I think that was one of the points that ruangrupa was trying to make, in that to kind of remove this distinction between art and life. Gabriela, you wanted to say something?
Yes, for me, it's just, I want to go back to the notion of break, and what I heard from you, Khaled, about radiating impact. I really like, rather than break, which is something that separates a unity into two components. Think about radiation, because radiation takes more space, but also time. This will develop through time. I think that there is a radiation of a way of doing, of thinking. When we talk about epistemologies, they are so crucial, because epistemologies are either visible or silence, right? And the fact that colonization, I mean, this is a very long conversation, but we need to look at history. Colonization had erased so many knowledge systems around the world. This is what makes, maybe my discourse in New Zealand was like, we were all colonized. So maybe we are less aligned in cultural terms with Polynesians or Southeast Asians, a little bit more with Africa, because we had a huge diaspora going to America. So those worlds mixed more intensely, but still we were all colonized, and that defines, without going into a lot of oppositional thinking, a very specific way of being in the world. So for me, this is a way to establish, from generosity, which I find very potent, a new framework that doesn't actually divide, but brings together the potency of so many different ways of doing things that are aligned, and create a possibility, a more visibility that will be defined through time. We don't know, but we can't really categorize documenta as a breakthrough or something that, but I think there is a possibility of a change of paradigm because of the effect that has already had since it opened. There was a lot of conspiracy theories, accusations, mistrust, all that is productive, because it starts opening up questions about what was stable before and is no longer.
If anyone wants to have a last word, because we can also open it up to the floor to invite some comments and questions. Dineo, do we have any comments, or we can invite some comments and questions from our listeners, our audience? and we can read some of them.
So far, we don't have any comments, but people are welcome to share through the chat panel. If not, I can unmute you and you can share your thoughts.
Okay, so actually we do have a little bit of time for Kian Chow. Do you want to respond to some of that?
I mean, I like the idea of possibilities that, documenta lumbung will have radiating effect. I mean, that's a beautiful word. Just that, I feel that when we use words like moment, there is this sense of hopping back to the art world, right? There is a sense of centrality of almost singular kind of art discourse, which is linked to programs and institutions, and people know one another. I just, have this feeling that, we still come back to a certain framework, which is like, a very tight, singular art world kind of connection, right? As we look at it. So I do not know if radiation is also something that actually goes beyond the usual, well, maybe not network, and that was criticized, but, friends of, curators and institutional partners and so on, and artists that we all know. But if you come to a collective, in a site that is in what I call Global South homeland, a lot of people feel that, they are addressing that this, the main body of discussions in our world, and within which documenta has a major role.
While we're waiting for some questions, I'm not as optimistic as maybe Gabriela and Nkule about the art world changing anytime soon. I think Documenta took a brave decision by selecting the collective ruangrupa. I don't think they expected the result that they got. Because I think ruangrupa, instead of playing it safe, they decided to do it the way they've always done it, and to do it convincingly. And I think that concept was carried through also very bravely on their end, with exhibiting discussions and artworks and archives that were in process and constantly changing. But the art world is very much linked to capitalism, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And if anything, I think what might happen is that the Venice Biennales and the other big art festivals of the world may be more cautious, rather than more open-minded about, who they are choosing and who they are selecting as artistic directors and as curators, because they may be fearful of the system collapsing. And, I think capitalism has fought a very strong fight to, countries have, many people have been murdered. We know the situation from South Africa, the USA, Congo. We know all of those dynamics. So that's not given up easily. And the art world is very much a part of the capitalist system. So I don't think that will change anytime soon. Nkule, you go for it. You're muted.
I am not any more optimistic than the average person, but I just think it's really about the terms of engagement, right? Like if we're talking about an art world as if it's somehow stable. And I think the proposition being made by collectivity and collaboration is precisely that there are parallel processes going on inside, beside, and around this otherwise stabilized art world that is exclusionary. So it's more about how do you engage other spaces and places and people and projects and processes that are outside of the market and capitalism and so on. But at the same time, we fully understand that capitalism is adaptive and co-optive and can swallow things whole if it decides that they are novel enough and so on, and that the moment of the mega exhibition generally results in sort of wider proliferation generally of the artists, objects, and careers and so on, so that there is this marker. So it would be interesting to see what happens in this after this moment to the collectives and the people who had already different kinds of circulation. So none of this, I mean, not to say none, but most of these projects have already and collectives have already been in different kinds of biennials and other sort of platforms. So they are not outside of the art world system. They're totally engaged. And it's more about really, I think, that the propositions being made and how we take them on and how we are confounded. You know, how is it that we can track back to a longer trajectory of collectivity and collectivism and communing in the arts as a desire, as an outcome, as processes. And then when it happens, we are somehow confounded by it. We have not expected it. We did not expect to see it. It is confusing when it shouldn't be. It's just simply a particular moment of appearance, right? The same way you would have if you had a whole documenta premised on painting. Just simply a stabilization around painting at this particular time. And there's probably some trajectories that lead us to that moment being being important at the time. So looking then again at like art world as a stable concept, friendships as uncontrollable or ungovernable concepts that speak to embodied ways of movements. And so who is a friend, what is a friend, when is someone a friend, and so on, are about mobility and movement. And if we're saying also we're looking at the global South, I think when I was looking through the exhibitions, I wasn't so much concerned about where the projects were coming from necessarily, but how they were interacting with each other in the space. And of course, they were always somehow marked. You know, you could mark the difference in geography through how the work is written about, spoken about, or how it makes its appearance in the space. But it was more important about suddenly this position of them next to each other, because then if we're talking about this political framework of global South, we all assume something like it's stable, that we understand what is going on within the politics. And it's also, again, not true. It's not stable. It's completely opaque. We don't understand each other at all. But there is a desire. So the framework of an existing, this global South political framework is a framework of desire to know each other, to engage further and know each other better, and not always position ourselves against, you know, coloniality and white supremacy as ways of governing the world, but more, you know, how do we relate to each other without this, third force somehow. I hope that was helpful to my position.
Gabriela, you want to add something? No, okay. So we have reached our 90 minutes. This is the last chance for the audience to ask some questions. And I think Dineo has a comment from Instagram, and maybe we can hear that meanwhile. Dineo, do you want to tell us what the comment is?
Sure. So this person is from Trevor Mukoli, who's on Instagram, says there were also gross failures to contextualize the work of some of the participants, especially from the Global South. Some of the cultural producers were only invited because of how they feed into the fetish of a primal, organic, grassroots organizing. But if their practices were studied just a bit more, they would be found to be injurious to their local context. This comment comes from being a victim of one of the participants in Documenta, also known as Wakaliwood.
Okay, thanks. I think there's another comment, but I think the point being made, and of course this is a general point, is that even within noble conceptions and organizations, there are also power struggles that happen. I mean, it's not an ideal, I think even within, for example, collectives, there are power struggles going on at the same time. I think, there is one more question, Gabriela. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, I have read it. Thank you for that.
Maybe I should read it out and then you can
Yes.
respond. This is from Alexandra Kokoli. Thank you for this brilliant discussion. I wonder what you make of Gabriela Salgado's suggestion that what could be done at work in Documenta 2022 is the outsourcing of curatorial labor to the global south at a time of crisis.
Yeah, as I said, it was a very cynical comment that meant, I mean, I am an optimistic, cynical person. So both things go hand in hand, depending on what I perceive to be truthful or not so truthful. I think that there is a need for other knowledge systems to rescue humanity. At the moment, for the first time, the West, or the extractionist aspect of capitalism is questioning itself as the source of the problem. Not that it's official. We are still, sourcing resources all around, especially the global south. And like there is no tomorrow, but there is tomorrow. And there is a very, very critical moment of concern about the environment and the future of the planet, in terms particularly of big migrations that will happen as a consequence of that, because Europe is very, very scared of migration. I lived in a country that is obsessed at the moment. The narratives of the UK are all around migration being stigmatized. So how do we see the future if we don't start acting differently as global citizens, as countries, as political systems? And that was the aspect that made me cynical about that very generous invitation of Documenta or the Global South Collective, that is pretty radical, that is based in practices that work for many years in Indonesia, but it's still very radical for a place like Kassel with a very, very Western history of presenting art. It's not just about them being from Indonesia, it's about the proposal, it's about the collectivity, it's about the challenges of the individual artists versus many, many minds thinking together, making together, and placing value on other aspects of production, cultural production, that are not necessarily objects. So for that reason, I'm thinking that there is a move of the world, at least part of the world, of, to think about, well, maybe if we have done this so badly, other people might give us solutions. And that might be desperate, but it's in a way extractionist. I'm not saying that it's curatorially extractionist, or that the curators were invited in order to extract particularly that way of thinking for the sake of the future of Europe or the West or the world or Documenta even. I'm not being very particular about this. I'm just thinking on the way that knowledge systems of other parts of the world, particularly indigenous knowledge systems, are now sourced as a handy solution for the problems that industrialization has created.
Thank you. There's another question by Amokhalang Maledu, and she is asking about the Berlin Biennale, which was also on at more or less the same time, also framed as a decolonial Biennale, but which the German public generally welcomed, whereas Documenta divided the public. Any comments on the Berlin Biennale? I didn't see it myself, but I've read quite a bit.
Sorry, it's again me, but I went to Germany to see both biennales, and it is a very different context. Berlin is a very international art scene, has a very international population, I have to repeat that, you know, there is no hegemony of the West or hegemony of the Global South. There is a lot of diversity in both and nuances, and Europe is full of other people and collectivity because of being, there are many Europes and many Africas and many Latin Americas and many Asias within the West. So in order to answer that properly, as I said at the beginning, the Documenta project was a nationalist project that attempted to bring the hope back to the German population after being defeated at war, but also stigmatized as a nation. And Documenta represented this hope in terms of artistic freedom and the opportunity for artists of the world to be congregated and speak of a future that was much brighter than that moment. It is a very crucial element to understand why the attack. I was explained that by a German person who grew up in Eastern Germany. And I totally understood why Kassel became, or Germany became so agitated about that symbol of unity of Germany. You can read the subtext as the West or Europe being challenged by other ways of doing things, because it was the cradle of a European, a German project. It's different to Berlin.
Thank you. Maybe we can start to round up. Kian-Chow, do you want to say something before we end?
I did not see the Berlin Biennale, but I could imagine that the controversy of the anti-Semitism in the Documenta was significant in the kind of response that we get from German communities. That leads to an interesting question that, whether people actually visited the Documenta. I mean, I didn't go to Berlin, but people spoke about Documenta, many without visiting that. So at the Let There Be Lumbung forum, Melanie Pudianta said that, I came to see the Documenta and I spent 2 days and I saw some venues and I believe in it. And people who talk about it, who didn't come, who didn't see it, do not know what they are saying. But I was thinking, the same is true of many curators and artists and so on from around the world who may not have gone, but they all, support Documenta, taking a position, just like, a position between the spectrum of right and left. And this is what happens to an arts event after it is being circulated as sometimes, just a singular idea that goes around. And that is rather unfortunate.
Nkule, any last words from you?
No, I didn't see the Biennale, but no last words, just to say the fellow panelists and thank you for the people who have listened to us and so on.
Yeah, I want to give a special thanks to our panelists, our esteemed panelists from around the world. Nkule, Durban born, or I know you went Cape Town. Huh? Newcastle.
Newcastle, yeah.
Oh, is that the Newcastle you're talking about in your bio?
Newcastle, KZN, 3 hours from you now.
I thought it was Newcastle in the UK.
Oh, no.
Okay, so KZN.
Change the town's name.
Okay, so Newcastle in KwaZulu-Natal, Cape Town, and Gothenburg, and currently in Accra. So thank you very much for your time.
Currently in Kumasi, but in Ghana.
Oh, in Kumasi, yeah. And Gabriela Salvador, Argentina, and all around the world, New Zealand, and working in London and installing an exhibition at the moment in Lisbon. Thank you very much for your time. I hope the installation is safe and when you go back now. In fact, Gabriela, I also know Gabriela for more than 10 years now, actually. I'm not sure where we first met, but all the biennales at Dakar and other places. And Kian Chow, thank you as well. Home base is in Singapore, but currently in Cambodia. And nice to see people in the background, that community that we're talking about. But I see that also someone helped you with another computer, it looks like, because you know, when you logged on and you had some assistance there. So always nice to have people around you helping as well. But thank you so much for such a lovely, rich and diverse conversation. This discussion has been recorded and will go to the VIAD website at some point. So it will be posted there. And hopefully we can come together again at another point to talk about something else. But thank you so much for your time, and see you all again soon. And thanks also to our audience that have come in numbers. So we got a very good response. And of course, otherwise it's just us talking to ourselves. So without our audience, it doesn't mean too much. And also, excuse me, thanks to the Visual Identities in Art and Design, VIAD, the Research Center at the University of Johannesburg, for hosting this talk and for supporting it, all the way through. Thank you so much. Okay, cheers, everyone. Bye.